So thank you very much for PA for inviting me for this webinar, which is, I believe, will be very, very interesting for the people who will listen to it. And also we will be recording it, the session, and making it available for anybody who have missed it, so that if you have registered, you will get the recording. What I'm going to talk today is on 6 or 7 subjects, particularly what is the current interest rate scenario, what's happening, and then very importantly, the do's and don'ts when interest rates are low. So a lot of people will be wondering what they should do. And I have got so many questions coming before even the seminar on this very aspect of what to do. Then we will touch on personal financial planning, how to borrow smart and repay smart, because this is the best time to borrow, understand how money works, and how to find the default risk of a financial institution, which is again important because your money is at risk if you happen to invest in an institution which may go bust. And lastly, very quickly, I will wind up with what is wealth management. Now, this is a slide which you can see the recent 1-year treasury bill rates, which have now come down to 4.86% as at last central bank auction held on 29th July, that is yesterday. So it is a massive reduction if you take from 16th November 2018, where the rates were about 11.25. So what that means is a reduction of 6.39% on the risk-free rate, which is the 1-year treasury bill rate. So like anything else, there are always two sides to every coin. Low interest rates could be a boom and a curse to those who are affected. In general, savers and lenders will lose, and investors benefit from low interest rates. So unfortunately, we are today talking about the people who are going to be affected by the low interest rates. Now, in this slide, you will see what is happening to the fixed deposit rates of the people. Now, 1 year ago, a fixed deposit on the average would have given you 11.5%. And today, if you go to any of the commercial banks, you will get 5.5% or 6%. I will show you individual rates from every bank later in the presentation. But on the average, that means a reduction of 6%, which tantamount to a 52% reduction of your income. If you consider a non-taxpayer who had 1 million rupees in a fixed deposit, he would have got 1 year ago 115,000 rupees. Today, you will get only 55,000. So that means your income is going to get affected by more than half, which is a serious impact. And also, if you take the tax implications, and Hemal will elaborate, anybody who earns more than 3 million rupees for the whole year have to file a tax return and pay taxes. Now, previously, what we had was a 5% withholding tax, which was a final tax, which means whatever your total income is, could be millions, you still paid only 5% on your interest income, and that was a final tax. So the new change means you will get into new tax brackets depending on your total income. If you are earning, you get into the 6% tax bracket, you will get a reduction of 52%, 2.7% impact on your interest income or because of taxes. 12% tax bracket, it is 55.7. If you are in the 18% tax bracket, 58.7%, which is nearly 60%. So a serious impact on your income levels, as if you consider both the reduction of interest rates as well as impact on taxes. So a recent press release on the Department of Census and Statistics, we saw in June, the food inflation was shown as 10%. So that was published as at, I think, 30th June. So what that means is, if you have invested in a fixed deposit today, and if the inflation rates continue to be on food as high as that, you will not be able to buy the same basket of food 1 year later by investing in a fixed deposit and taking the principal and interest. So which is a big problem for the retirees because they depend on the interest income. And this is what the end result would be. So I call it Tanpat Karwan Anata. So it is the effect that will have on the retired people. Those who are about to retire also will be significantly impacted because their nest egg will be generating much lower income. Of course, this benefits the rich people, the businesses, the government, because they have borrowed. When you have a lot of borrowings, when the interest rates come down, it is fantastic because they will be encouraged to spend more. And I think the government also intention is for people to start new ventures and generate economic growth by bringing down the interest rates. However, the low interest rates could encourage people and the government to do irresponsible things, more risky, unproductive investments. So that's the unfortunate part of low interest rates. We saw in the subprime crisis when the interest rates were very low, people invested in houses and ended up in an even bigger crisis. So there could be other impacts when low interest rates are there in the economy. So what are the do's and don'ts when interest rates are low? This is the most important thing on my presentation. So do's is you should also make capital out of the low interest rates. That is refinance your high cost debt. If you have debt or mortgage, you start looking around to refinance your existing debt. Particularly if you have a housing loan, go back to a bank who is offering housing loans and see whether you can negotiate a lower rate. Of course, make sure you get a fixed rate, not a variable rate. Why? Because when the interest rates go up, if you have got a fixed rate, you will not be having a problem because your rate is fixed at the current rates. I believe the current housing loan rates, banks are offering as low as 9%. And if you check your existing mortgage, it will be definitely more. Could be around 15%. So I believe that's the first thing you can do. If you have debt, you can renegotiate. Why? Because you may be able to pay back faster because of your interest costs coming down. Now, that may not be an option for a lot of other people who have no borrowings. So if you are a senior citizen, of course, you have one great benefit. That is the government of Sri Lanka offers 15% for a 1.5 million rupee deposit. Of course, it is in one bank only. That means you can go to any commercial bank, but in one instance only. You can't go and put 1.5 million in another bank. So that will give you, if at all, 18,750 rupees a month. But if you are looking for anything more than that, you will not get. So only thing you can benefit is additional 50 basis points on the deposit rates offered by any financial institution, be it a bank or finance company. So that's where the problem is. So you will have to look actively for alternative options to invest, which depends on your risk tolerance level. So I will talk a lot about risk tolerance and also credit ratings, because before you invest, you need to look at how you can mitigate risk or reduce risk. And the most important thing you need to understand is, first of all, know the risk. Now, a lot of people invest in finance companies. I would say not only finance companies, even in pyramid schemes, in Ponzi schemes, and so many unregulated, unlicensed schemes, because they do not understand the risk or they don't look for the risk. So most important thing is first find out the risk. So you should start shopping around. Switch banks, because sometimes you may get a better rate. So when I show you the rates, you will understand what I mean. And hard negotiate your fixed deposit interest, because you may be able to negotiate a better rate if you talk to your bank before your FD matures. Remember, there's something called automatic renewal. If you stick with automatic renewal, the bank will just renew it at the prevailing rate, and you will get your fixed deposit interest suddenly coming down drastically, as I showed before. So negotiate long before your deposit matures, and then inform the bank, I am going to take the money out and go to another institution. They may offer you better or at least some other benefits. So one another way to enhance your income is to spread your money across different asset classes. What are they? They are income funds that are offered by unit trusts. There are money market funds and income funds, which have benefited because of the interest rates continuously coming down, because they have invested in long duration bonds like government bonds. So the capital gains, they are still able to distribute. Now unit trusts, money market and income funds are very much similar to a savings account, and you still get good rates. So you can pick up some of them and diversify, not to put all your money in one unit trust or one money market fund, but diversify. Then also look out for listed debentures that keep coming out. Now, recently we had the People's Bank debenture, which offered 9.5%, but unfortunately it is restricted to individuals because of the convertibility to equity if there is a need by central bank. So under the powers of the central bank, those debentures could get converted to equity. So if it is not those type of tier 2 capital raising for banks, there could be opportunities there will be higher rates coming up. If you had invested in those debentures some time ago, you will be still benefiting from the higher rates that prevailed some time ago. Even if you had invested in 5-year fixed deposits, you would be still benefiting. In my case, I'm still getting 16%. So that is what you have to plan out when interest rates are high, to lock up for longer term. When interest rates are low, you don't lock up for longer term, you stay short. So other instrument will be high dividend paying, dividend growth, stocks with dividend growth potential. Now, in the stock market, we have a lot of volatility. That means the price of stocks goes up and down. But if you are able to invest in high dividend paying stocks, and come what may the stock prices move, you are going to get a steady income. Now remember, the income or revenues of a lot of companies have got affected, particularly the hotel sector. So leisure sector, there are no revenue. So you have to be very, very cautious when you are investing in stocks to look out for high dividend paying stocks, which are not seriously got affected by the COVID-19 epidemic. So what you should be doing is diversifying, putting money into different asset classes so that you can increase returns and reduce your exposure or concentration on fixed deposits. One piece of advice I can give you is to spread the fixed deposits into different types of companies, because you have the negotiation power then, because every company will try their best to give you the best possible rate. But certain central bank regulations now prevent any of the financial institutions, be it banks or finance companies, offering higher rates. So it's up to you to negotiate and find a way to get a better rate. Now, one additional thing you need to do is to, if you want to reduce your tax burden and also estate planning, you can spread your deposits among your family members. Because if you keep it under your name, you will end up in a higher tax bracket. But if you spread it among your wife and children, particularly the adult children, you may be able to come down in your tax bracket. As well as in your demise, there will be no problems, particularly in terms of your loved ones being able to have access to those funds. If you keep it under your name without having a nominee, you will lose all the money. They will have to wait till a testimonial case is over. So be very careful on your investments, particularly listening to third parties who claim to be from well-known companies or well-known institutions who may swindle you, because sometimes these fixed deposits are offered with a small change in the institution's name and they are not authentic. they are not actually coming from the particular institution you think you have heard about. So we have seen hundreds of instances where people have been swindled by giving a well-known name, and then to find the fixed deposit or the instrument they think they are investing is not from that particular institution they think. So be very, very wary of unlicensed, unregulated entities, Ponzi schemes, pyramid schemes. There are a lot of scams, particularly when you start looking out for better return. Because when you are hard up, when your income streams have come down by 50%, you will start looking out. That is human nature of finding higher paying opportunities, higher income generating opportunities, which could be frauds. We had seen Golden Key Credit Key Company, which was giving very high rates and it collapsed. So sometimes be very wary of these higher returns that are offered. Ask the question, how can they afford to give such a high return? Then you will understand whether it is a legitimate entity or not. So that's my main advice for do's and don'ts. And I hope you got the idea of how you're going to manage your finances. So to give you a little bit of more detailed knowledge, I have written 3 books in 3 languages: English, Sinhala, and Tamil. Because Sri Lanka, the financial literacy levels are very low compared to other economies, particularly the advanced economies. They have about 65% adult financial literacy. Compared to Sri Lanka, we have about 35%. It is not only the poorer people, but even professionals who are mostly listening to this webinar are very poor in their understanding of finance. They may be doctors, even lawyers, but financial matters, they are not very savvy. So I strongly advocate people to read these booklets. It's about 30 odd pages on available to download free of charge from cfasrilanka.lk website, and pass it on to their loved ones as well. Because everybody, if you have read this, will never fall into, in the whole lifetime, I'm giving this life skill, never fall into scams or invest in institutions, financial institutions that will go bust. So all that knowledge is very clearly articulated in these books. So first thing I want to talk about is financial planning, which is very well covered in the book. But just to give an introduction, which is an extremely important practice if you want to build your financial well-being, because you are forced to look at your current expenses and have some goal to achieve. If you have a goal, only you will work towards it. Otherwise, what will happen is you will not save enough. So particularly young people need to start the savings habit in a younger age, but whatever the age, you can start if you follow a particular process. Now this is the process. First of all, know your goals, and then identify alternative actions that is required to achieve your goal. So then you move on to evaluate the alternatives, create and implement your action plan, and review it, and determine the current financial position. So there is a clear process which is well explained in the booklet to give you an idea of how to manage your finances, because it's essential. There's no magic where you can survive with very low income. So if your income comes down, you have to manage your expenses. So which means you have to live within your means. So it has to be a change of your lifestyle or style of living. And where you cannot, certain things which you cannot afford, you'll have to give up. So your financial plan will give you that goals, resources, and the responsibilities to the entire family, because you discuss with your entire family, particularly the children and your spouse, and have this plan in place so that you work within that budget. So I want person who have used even a normal accounting system, so that I have the financial numbers for now about 25 years. I know exactly my own inflation itself. Why? Because the financial numbers are available. So what you spend, if you know what you spend, you can budget, you can plan, you can know exactly how much you want to save. And my advice to everybody is first take out what you want to save and spend what is left, not the other way around. If you take 100 people, 99.9% will spend and save what is left. That's not the way to do it. What you do is have this plan, the goal, and to achieve the goal, you know what is required to be saved monthly and take it out first and then spend the balance. So you will be automatically disciplined. Always avoid this get rich quick schemes. You will be thrown at various areas. Never go after them because they are not going to save you money but put you even in bigger trouble or difficulty. So you have to be realistic and your goals has to be something which is achievable. It's through self-control. You have to work towards it. Forces you to think and plan and make adjustments as required. So that's the whole steps of financial planning, which you will have to adopt if your incomes come down, so that you are able to manage your financial affairs. Now, the most important thing to manage is you can see a lot of people shouting around saying that cost of living is going up. No, cost of living is not expensive. It is the cost of lifestyle that is expensive. So you have to change your lifestyle. There's no choice because we all have needs and wants. So our wants are unlimited and will always exceed our income. No matter how much money you make, you will always be not having enough money if you are unable to control your wants. Your expenses will always outpace your income. So you see that in all the people who are lottery winners. They win the lottery and in no time they are broke because of your wants. Once you get into certain habits of spending, you continue to spend and you live with that. So you have to define what you want and live within your means. That is the difference which this slide gives you, needs and wants. Needs you have to spend on. Okay, I'm moving into borrowing. One thing I can tell you is this is the best time to borrow, but don't get carried away. It is imperative that you borrow smart. And what that means is you have to borrow only to generate further income, not to spend on consumption. Now, make that distinction very clear. Do not borrow for consumption, borrow for generating income. So you have to borrow provided you have sufficient money to repay, even if it is zero interest. A lot of credit cards entice you for zero interest borrowing. But remember, if you borrow, you have to repay. That is the principle. So that's what happens when you borrow. You are forced to repay. Otherwise, you will end up in a situation where your name goes to script and you are basically marked as a person who has defaulted your loans. So when making a decision to take a loan, you need to look at and demand to know from your financial institution what is your monthly payment is going to be. You need to know that very clearly. And also, what are the fees? That is called smart negotiation, or you need to get the terms smartly identifying what are the terms. Because if you happen to miss the installment, what is going to happen to you? Are they going to throw penalties? And what will happen if you delay 1 or 2 days or 1 month? So need to find out those not from one institution, but shop around. Don't stick to one institution when you're borrowing. Check from few institutions And then you also learn more because you talk to more people, and then you should borrow. So you should postpone any purchase until you have more money saved rather than borrowing. So you have to borrow to generate income. I have to emphasize that. And devote a lot of time to understand the rates. There are different types of rates people will quote. Sometimes the poorer people will be quoted a weekly rate or monthly rate. They are exorbitant once you calculate the annual effective rate. All that is explained in the book, how to calculate even those rates. So you need to know the rate at which you are charged when you borrow. Otherwise, you will get into a debt trap, which you will never be able to easily get out. It's very easy to borrow or get into debt, but getting out of debt is very hard. So do not fail to ask the right questions when you borrow and compare the terms one against the other. Pay particular attention to get fixed rates. As I mentioned earlier, fixed rates do not change as the market rates go up. But if you take a loan or get a mortgage on a variable rate, you will end up, as the market rates go up, you will have to pay more. The monthly installment will be more. So be very wary of the difference between fixed rate and variable rate. So get the terms in writing. Make sure before you sign those small letters, you understand. Ask them to explain. Whoever your lender is, do not sign blindly, as a lot of people do on the offer letter. So the advice I can give is, as very clearly explained, there is something called compound interest, which is your greatest friend. It is the eighth wonder of the world. But those who understand it earns it. He who doesn't pays it. So remember, when you're borrowing and also earning or investing, this principle. Understand how money works. The most important thing is it determines whether you will be financially successful. Is controlling your spending and living within your means. Because if you start early, you will have more time to build your wealth. Because in no time, you will find the interest income on interest or interest on interest starts growing big numbers. So you will be able to live very comfortably, buy all the luxuries you want because you have built it. But if you don't start with a lot of careful financial planning, as I explained at the beginning, and build it, you will never get there. So you have to balance your present desires and future goals. So delayed gratification is the answer if you want to have a financial well-being. That's the message I want to emphasize. So there are two ways to make money. One way is to work for money. I think a lot of people go for a job and work for money. But there's another better way. That is, get your money to work for you by saving and investing and getting a higher rate of return over and above the inflation. Your goal should be to get a higher rate than inflation. If you get a fixed deposit at 6% and inflation is 10%, you are not going to go very far because of your purchasing power gets diminished. You will invest in amount of money you can buy a loaf of bread. End of the period, with the principal and the interest, you would be able to buy only a slice of bread. So remember that. So the difference between a financial literate and illiterate is that the financial illiterate person will be spending their expenses on paying debt, that is increasing their liabilities. Whereas the financially literate will increase their assets, that will generate income. So your goal should be to build your assets, have excess cash flow from assets reinvested in the assets column. You can see that assets growing, whereas the person who has liabilities will end up increasing expenses because he has to keep on paying higher expenses. More money that goes into asset column, the more asset columns grows. So practice delayed gratification. I'm repeating it, but that's the message. Buy assets first, luxuries last. Ask how I can afford it. Always ask before you buy whether you can afford it, because you are going to forego all that interest on interest or compounding that you will get when you buy things first. So borrowing makes everything exponentially expensive because compounding interest turns from being your friend to your enemy. So my message is very clear now to everybody. So now I'm moving into another point, which is all about risk. Now, a lot of people in Sri Lanka are very fearful about volatility, and they invest in instruments that give a fixed return because they are fearful of the price or the principal changing. Now, that's why people do not invest in the stock market. They go for fixed deposits. But you are taking a risk. You are taking the interest rate risk and the default risk. So they don't know. Sometimes the finance companies go bust and they start crying out, all our investments are gone. We can't even have pay our medical fees. So that is the risk. So you have to understand the risk of all asset classes. Now this particular pyramid shows the low risk to high risk. The cash is the lowest. But as you go along, you can see treasury bills, treasury bonds are low risk because government have the power to print money. Then bank deposits, safer than finance company deposits. Then money market funds, which are very short term, under 12 months instruments, which are low risk, but you may not know. Gold is another instrument that the poorest of the poor invest. Then certificates of deposits. There are various things in the blue ones which are low risk, but some they know a lot of people don't know. Then in the yellow, there is other things like income funds, which is giving pretty good returns to as long as they have capital gains. Then finance company deposits, debentures listed in the stock market, real estate. You will be seeing very soon a real estate instrument called REITs, which with 1,000 rupees you can benefit the gains of the real estate market, rental yields and capital gains. So there will be instruments that are coming up and available to you to make use of it. Then you equity funds and stocks, as I said, high dividend giving stocks could be another income stream. So all these are the instruments. The red I don't want to talk about. They are very risky, but some people are playing on cryptocurrencies today. In Sri Lanka, we don't have options and futures. So those are risky stuff, but it depends on your risk tolerance. If you can sleep well by investing in the stock market, by all means do it. Stock markets are volatile. There can be 30-40% reduction. Recently after the COVID-19, our market came down, but it's going up. So, you should not be panicking and getting out when the market is low. That's the point that has to be stressed. Now I'm going to go into the default risk of financial institutions. How do you find it? Very, very easy. It's like your report card. When you go to school, you get an A, you are very happy. If you get a B, you are not. If you get a D, you are not you won't be able to go home. So that's the principle here also. The green side is investment quality. If your financial institution is rated by either Fitch Ratings or ICRA in that category, that is triple B minus and above, you can be comfortable. But be wary, be careful, and it is in the double B plus B category because they are risky. I'm not telling you not to invest, but if you are investing, be wary because they are higher risk compared to the investment grade rated instruments or debt institutions, financial institutions or instruments. So credit ratings is not a guarantee, it just gives a indication or opinion or ability to service the promised interest and principal on a timely basis. That's all it says. So it is not something you can use in the stock market, but it is something you can use when you invest in any fixed income instrument, because it gives the default risk or credit risk of the ability and willingness to pay the debt on time. So these are the rates. Now I said I will show you some commercial banks. You can see 1 year ago what the rates they offered, and also as of July 30th, that is today, what the rates they are offering. Just 1 week ago, they were offering about 50 basis points more. So you can see how fast these rates are coming down. This is just today. Just 1 week ago, I did the same presentation and it was different. So you can see the difference of the rates within the 1 year. Only additional 50 basis points to this rates on July 30th for people who are over 60. I don't need to talk about very much. Now you know all about credit rating. So you will pick a bank which gives the rate based on the risk. So that means you want to invest in a higher return fixed deposit. You will pick the bank with the highest rate and the lowest risk, which is indicated by the rating. So you don't want to put your money in an institution, say for example, purely from a credit rating perspective, Union Bank at 6%, when you can get 6.25 from a plus bank like PFCC Bank. So that's the message I want you to understand. So you have to look at credit risk and invest based on risk rather than the return. First the risk and then look for the return. These are finance company deposits. You can see practically all are offering 8.53. And if it is a senior citizen, you will get 9.0. That is the 50 basis points more. Here again, you can see a finance company which is offering higher rates when the risk is slightly high. That is Singer Finance. Sorry, not Singer Finance. That's okay. If you the other way around, if you take a lower risk institution like People's Leasing, it's offering a lower rate, 8%. But why not look at HMB Finance, which gives 8.53, and the rating is high. Why is the rating high? Because it's 50% also owned by HNB Bank. Same thing with Siapatal, owned by Sampath Bank. So it's A rated and they are giving a lower rate. Why? Because they know they are higher. They can offer a lower rate because they are better rated. So that's the principle you need to understand. So last slide, wealth management. I want to emphasize is about having all of you having a portfolio of investment. That means you do not only have fixed deposits but have other asset classes. So many investors use this something called investment portfolio policy statement to manage their wealth, where you go to an investment advisor and get them to advise you, because otherwise you may tend to do things which are irrational, and sometimes you may rush into things which is going to detriment to your financial well-being. So always have a portfolio investments and diversify your investments to reduce risk. Different asset classes have different levels of risk and return characteristics, and they behave differently under the same market conditions. So therefore, the positive performance of one asset class can offset the negative performance of another asset class. Hence, investors need to diversify across asset classes within an asset class as well. So if you are investing in even stock market, you need to diversify. If you have to put all your money in shares, you are in deep trouble. So what matters is the risk return characteristics of these asset classes. I'll give you one example. When the market rates are coming down, stock prices, gold, real estate values go up. So today we see, due to the huge political, economic, and trade-related uncertainties created from the COVID-19 pandemic and inflation risk, gold prices have skyrocketed. It is 11-year high. It is giving US dollars 1,911 per ounce. During this year alone, gold prices have gone up by $380. So gold is a safe haven. People invest when things that are bad, the economy or uncertainty is high. So that's one aspect I want to touch. So review your portfolio of these different asset classes routinely and look at what gives a better return in the future and have a planned investment strategy that will make the difference. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. And I'm sure our panelist discussion will be very exciting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you for that comprehensive overview. As described earlier, we have three panelists. And in this sequence, they would be speaking, Mr. Chanakya Disanayaka, Mr. Neomal Gunawardana, and Dr. Vijayawardana. May I call on Chanakya to say say his piece on, I think, investment options? Chanakya, over to you.
Thanks, Faisal. So I'm going to share a few thoughts, some observed points on Sri Lanka's different asset classes available for investors, including this audience we have today, and what have been the long run returns. So first of all, we talk a lot about the stock market and the equity market. And it's interesting to observe that in the very long run, if you look at the total average return that people have earned from the Sri Lanka's equity markets, going back all the way till about 1993, Faisal, when the market opened up. I mean, the average return has been up to end of 2019, been about like 12.5%. So if you really look at what has been the interest rates during this period, even if you look at a 1-year T-bill average rate, you know, Sri Lanka had very high interest rates in 1990s and early part of 2000. So, I mean, you would have earned the same return essentially in a fixed income instrument like a 1-year treasury bill. So this is something quite interesting to note, that why people have preferred fixed income. You can't actually blame them, because fixed income returns have been quite structurally high. Even once a country during the last decade moved to a very much of a low inflation regime, still then real rates have been very high and people have been very high interest rates. So in the current environment, as Ravi pointed out, one of the easiest options that investors have who prefer fixed income returns is, instead of getting the easy way out with the bank fixed deposits, exploring what the money market funds of professionally managed asset management firms offer. So money market funds as income funds invest in a wider variety of corporate instruments, and typically we have seen that you get a interest rate upside of 1 to 1.5% at minimum compared to the 1-year fixed deposit rates offered by banks. Of course, sometimes the risk can be high. Some of the money market funds may be investing in quite high risk corporate debt instruments. So it is up to the investor to also understand what are the underlying assets. Second thing, it's quite normal. While the long-run equity market returns have not been too high in Sri Lanka, periodically there have been very large bull runs. So I earlier mentioned that the average return has been around 12.5% from 93 to 2019 end. However, there had been 3 major bull markets First one being during the 1993, the first entry of the foreign institutional investors to Sri Lanka. Second one was the 2002-2003 ceasefire-led bull run, and the third one was obviously the largest, and within a very short period, market essentially going by almost trebling within the 2009-2011 period with the post-war economic boom. So right now, the market has been down for a number of years, and Sri Lanka's equity valuations are quite low. So naturally, people are having a renewed interest in the stock market. So my three rules for a individual investor is that yes, by all means, consider equity market investments. But if you can answer these three questions, first of all, can you lock in your money for at least a 2-year period? Because equity markets, in my opinion, are not for speculation or for day trading. They are for at least medium-term investors. Second thing, if your liquidity needs are, you can afford to keep the money locked in for at least 2 years, the downside or the volatility, can you absorb a 20% loss, which is not very unusual in equity markets in anywhere in the world, and still have your main elements of your lifestyle unchanged? And the last question you should ask is that, do I know about the companies that I'm investing? Do I have a view on the economic outlook and the companies that I'm investing in? Or am I just doing it because someone gave me a tip or someone suggested I go buy this stock? So even when it comes to equity markets, I strongly suggest investors, retail investors, to look at the professional unit trust management companies and the professional services offered. We now have in Sri Lanka very low cost index funds that can invest the investor money in an index of securities like the SL S&P Top 20 Index, and that might be a quite a lower cost option for someone to get exposure to the equity market. Last point I want to highlight is that in Sri Lanka, we always talk about real estate investments, and some of the senior citizens in this group might be having significant real estate holdings and also looking at this particular option. So the thing about real estate, yes, it generally gives a good capital gain historically in Sri Lanka, but we must also note a very much of a peculiar development to Sri Lanka. Typically, the residential real estate property investments carry a very low. In most countries, there is a connection between the market interest rates and the rental yields. Rental yield is nothing other than the annual rental you earn from the property as a percentage of the market value of the property. But in Sri Lanka, for varied reasons, rental yields tend to be quite low. So if you're owning a real estate investment, it might be useful to compare what you're actually earning from it versus what you could have earned if the money is there in a money market fund or even a simple fixed deposit, and try to optimize your current income. So that is basically something that we can all keep in mind. And lastly, as Ravi indicated, Sri Lanka is finally moving towards the real estate investment trust. So that will give an individual investor also a better opportunity to take part in income generating real estate properties that are professionally managed, and of course some exposure to property price upside also. So that's basically, in my opinion, the spectrum of investments that are available for each of the individual investors to consider currently.
Thank you, Chanakya. Thank you for that quick take on investment options. Before we move to our next panelist, Ravi, there is a query as to whether your presentation is available to the participants.
Yes, it can be made available in the recording of the whole session.
Okay, right. Thank you. And once again, there are questions that are coming in. At the end of this discussion, we'll try to forward the question to the panelists and answer as many as possible within the time stipulated. With that, can I move on to Neomal to speak on tax implications vis-a-vis the low interest rate regime?
Yes, I think tax is one of those areas which I think is largely positive because at the moment, up to 3 million per annum of income of an individual is exempt from tax. So therefore, that is 250,000 per month is exempt from tax. So for that reason, I think tax on fixed deposit or any other fixed income earning instrument should not be an issue for investors. Because after all, we are really talking about people who would be in financial difficulties arising from the reduction in interest rates. If you are at levels of income, let's say of 750,000 a month, then I think that's a different forum in which the matter should be discussed. So the bottom line on tax is tax at the moment should not be an issue because of the personal allowance of 3 million per annum, which has become the tax-free threshold. Now, going forward, is this sustainable? The fact of the matter is that taxes would definitely need to be increased going forward. And the main tax which the government has lost revenue is on value-added tax. So value-added tax at 8% is unrealistically low, and whatever the name which is put to the tax, there will have to be an increase in that tax, whether it's called value-added tax or some other name. Definitely that tax will have to increase. On the value-added tax brings about 80% of government tax revenue, with income tax bringing only about 15%. Out of the income tax, a substantial amount of income tax comes from withholding taxes. Now the government has removed all these withholding taxes, which includes the withholding tax on interest income. Now, withholding tax on interest income also brought about a substantial amount of revenue for government, and previously it was at the rate of 5%. So therefore, I think there will also be a push for a reintroduction of some sort of withholding tax on interest income. In which case, obviously, there might be a tax burden as well, even though you are on a lower tax threshold than maybe 250,000 per month, you might still be suffering some amount of tax. Now, I think one of the sad things about this whole episode of low interest rates is that we need to discuss it when interest rates are really low. This webinar would have been really appropriate at a time when interest rates were high, at which point of time people could have been informed and educated about the importance of investing long term, locking into high rates, and maybe layering your investment. Now, for example, if 2 years ago you had to invest, let's say, 10 million rupees, and you invested it in a 1-year deposit, a 2-year deposit, a 3-year deposit, a 4-year debenture, and a 5-year debenture in companies, all of which had the same rating, then in such a case, the 2-year deposit may have matured this year when interest rates are low. In which case, you are having maybe 20% of your investment, which is subject to a renewal at a lower interest rate. But your 4-year deposit will only mature maybe in 2022. And your 5-year deposit would have only matured in 2023, which has already locked in to those high interest rates. So I think this importance of being able to layer your investments is also important, which means not only talking about 1-year fixed deposits, but also talking about longer term investments, which may get interest maybe once in 6 months, but yet it enables you to mitigate some of the hardships which are caused by sudden dips in interest rates. Now, as Ravi indicated, one of the real risks which occur when interest rates come down is that people are persuaded to invest in riskier investments. Now, as it stands now, any deposit which is in a licensed commercial bank, a licensed specialized bank, or a registered finance company up to 600,000 rupees is covered up by deposit insurance, by the deposit insurance scheme which is maintained by the central bank. So therefore, at least if you have, let's say, 5 deposits in 5 institutions of 600,000 rupees each, at least you can be reasonably sure that those are covered by deposit insurance, at least with regard to a potential default. Now, however, the sad part of the deposit insurance scheme itself is that there seems to be substantial drawdowns on the deposit insurance scheme arising from the recent failure of finance companies. And those finance companies are the ones who have contributed least as premiums to the deposit insurance scheme itself. So therefore, the people who have contributed the least are actually drawing out the most. So therefore, at some point of time, I think those depositors or people who are investing in that category of instruments also need to be told, I think sometimes quite bluntly, right, that they have drawn out more than their proportionate share from funds which are covering depositors in general. Because after all, a large part of the depositors in this country are right-thinking people of society who invest in maybe the National Savings Bank and things like that. So therefore, the premiums which those institutions are paying by way of deposit insurance, right, should not eventually be utilized to eventually be settling the people who are undertaking maybe a relatively high amount of risk. At some point of time, I think that's fine. Maybe that's the way it works. But at some point of time, I think we need to be telling those people who are making a drawdown on deposit insurance that they are a relatively fortunate lot in being able to draw out monies which they never contributed by way of premiums to the scheme. Yeah, that's it, Faisal, from my side. If there are any questions, we take it up at the appropriate time.
Okay, thank you, Neoman. I'll move on to Dr. Vijayawardena, who will discuss the strategy of low interest rates and its in reviving the economy. Dr. Vijayawardena, over to you.
Thanks, Faisal. And I think Ravi Abesuriya had taken us through an elaborative scheme of low interest rates and how the interest rates would affect all the investors and what the investors should do. Now, if we take the theme of this particular webinar, the dark side of low interest rates, it itself has a twist, because some people believe there's a bright side of the low interest rates. Those who believe that there's a bright side are the governments of all the countries in the world, including our own government, supported by their respective central banks. They think that the low interest rates are actually a blessing rather than a curse. So as a result, what has happened throughout the globe today is that the central banks supported at the instance of the governments, they have placed all of us, thrown us into the ring, and we have been ring fenced, and at the same time, the lots of liquidity has been pumped into the ring, and the interest rates have been drawn very, very low, and people are supposed to use this high liquidity and take advantage of the high liquidity, and they are supposed to emerge and they become survivors in this particular financial catastrophe. So, but actually, it has actually, the most of the people, even though the central banks think that the customers, the people in the world, the population and the people should benefit out of the low interest rate, it is the central banks themselves that have actually become the most fearful of the low interest rates. And as a result, it's a popular craze now. For example, the recent outcome that we have got from the European Union, United States, Japan, and also Australia, they have reduced the potential yield rates of all the investment funds which the governments can maintain outside the country. And for example, if we take the benchmark interest rate of the US Treasury, 5-year US Treasury, which is simply a 0.25%. In the terminology of Mr. Ragabesuri, it's only 25 basis points. And in the United States itself, during the last 6-month period, the money supply has been increased up to 18,000 billion, which is about, say, 90% of the total GDP of United States. And this has actually scared all the central banks in the world, and they are now transforming their own financial assets into gold. So that is why we have this gold rush at the particular point of time. And the gold prices have increased from around, say, 1,500 US dollars in February to about 1,950 US dollars, the latest available today. And all the central banks in the world, except our own Central Bank of Sri Lanka, are buying gold now and investing. But in the case of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, we have been told by the central bank that they made a strategic decision in February to reduce our gold stock from 19 tons of gold to 6.7 tons. They sold the gold in the market in February, and they are actually carrying the money in the form of investments in US treasury bonds, which carries only a 0.25% interest right now. And we have been now out of this, we had been maintaining about, say, 19 tons of gold on average during the last 3-year period. That has come down to 6.7 tons today. And if anything happens to the financial markets and the global financial markets, our central bank is now fully handicapped. And that is why it had to go for a special repo facility with United States Federal Reserve Bank to get 1 billion because there is a sovereign bond payment due in October. We need liquid cash in order to enable the central bank to get this liquid cash. They have gone into a repo facility with the United States Federal Reserve Bank by actually pledging 1 billion worth of treasury bonds that we are having in the United States. So what we feel today is that even though the low interest rates have been rated as a dark side, it is being considered by the governments as a bright side. But at the same time, the very same governments are now fearful of the low interest rates that are having in the global economy. So all the countries are now transforming their assets from financial assets from US various types of financial instruments to gold. And the main countries that have been doing in the recent past, last 3 weeks, had been China and India. They are transforming their financial assets into gold as a hedge. So this is where we stand today, because if we think that if we can flood the economy with a huge amount of liquidity, as we have done in Sri Lanka, and also as had been done by all the governments in the world, and thinking that the people will make use of this high liquidity available in the financial system for productive investment, and taking us out of the current economic malaise that we are suffering, where we have made a mistake. That is because the terms and conditions which the governments and the central banks have set for us by throwing us into the ring, we have to play now at the rates that the governments have decided. And it was shown, the dark side of it was shown in the treasury bill auction that took place yesterday. Out of the total amount that the government offered, the central bank offered, only 40% was taken from the market, and the balance 60% had to be funded by the central bank by printing new money. Now, this is happening throughout the world because when you have low interest rates, as Ravi Abesuri had very clearly told us, the investors are actually the savers are disadvantaged and they get low income. Therefore, they try to convert their assets into some, hedge their assets to get the benefit out of the low interest rates. And the most probably, in the case of central banks, it has been gold. In the case of the general members of the public, it has been real estate. Both are considered as unproductive investments when it comes to taking an economy which has been in the downswing and also at the bottom of the economic growth. Because what we need today is to convert this liquidity which has been created by our own central bank, which comes to about, say, on average 160 billion in the financial system alone. The bankers are very, conveniently parking them in overnight standing deposit facility available in the central bank at 4.5%, and without lending to the customers. And when it comes to lending to the customers, our problem has been that the customers have not been able to come up with viable borrowing programs. So as a result, there is a gap between what the government and the central bank envisage and also what the people of the country want. So as a result, the money is not moving out. At the same time, all the facilities that we have offered in Sri Lanka today are for the small and medium enterprises and also for the large corporates. But quite apart from that, the whole economy is dependent on two other sectors, which we call the micro sector and the meso sector. The meso sector is the sector in between micro and the SMEs, which is the largest contributor to the employment of the country. For example, if you see these sideway tailors, sideway lathe shops, sideway fishmongers, they all belong to this meso sector. They are not SMEs, neither are they the micros. And this sector has not been supported by any of the lending banks, and not even by the refinance facility that has been established by the central bank under its own window. So as a result, all these people have become victims of the informal money lenders who are very quick and very active in the market today. And if meso, because I have now collected a large number of cases of this meso sector, and I have found that, when they had visited the banks to borrow money, some of them have been thrown out because their name had been in the CRIB, Credit Information Bureau. And as a result, they are no longer eligible to borrow from the formal banking system. But they also need money. And what has happened is the informal money lenders, without doing this formal financial analysis, which the banks and the lenders are doing, they do actually by observing the behavior of the man, which we call the eyeball test. The informal money lenders conduct this eyeball test, and they find that the person is creditworthy, and the amount of money that the borrower needs is delivered to his doorstep. He doesn't have to sign any bond, any application, nor does he have to bring any collateral, no guarantors. The money is delivered. But of course, the interest rate is 10% per month, which is to be paid within 100 days. And the recovery is on a daily basis. Every night, the informal money lender's agent will visit the borrower, and the borrower will have to keep ready cash in order to make the payment. If he fails to make the payment, the loan is extended and it is doubled. And I have noted in the case of one tailor who had borrowed only $500,000 rupees from the informal money lenders on these conditions, because he had been thrown out by the state banks, by the National Savings Bank, and by two of the private banks. And he had borrowed $500,000. Now he has ended up with $1.5 million indebted to the informal money lenders, and he doesn't know what to do. So what I suggest is that even though the government thinks that the low interest rates will be a benefit, it's a bright side, definitely globally it has not been a bright side for the central banks. The central bank had been converting their low interest earning finance assets into gold. It has not been a bright side for the micro and meso sector borrowers because these people cannot borrow any money from the formal banking institution. No, it has been, I think, a bright side for the even SMEs and large corporates, because according to the central bank data, of the 150 billion refinance fund it has created so far, they have been able to lend only 72 billion. So what it means is the money is not flowing out. So what has happened here is the government and the central bank has thrown us into the ring. All of us are in the ring now. We cannot do anything without against what the government wishes. There's a huge amount of liquidity floating around us, and eventually we will all be inundated by this huge liquidity, and I am sure that pretty soon we'll all get drowned. So thank you very much, Faisal.
Thank you, Mr. Wijewardena. Thank you for that comprehensive ground situation of this of government policies. Now we'll move on to we have finished with the panelists. We'll move on to the next level of our discussion, that is the questions. There are a series of questions that have come in. I will start. We'll try to get them answered as far as possible. We have about, say, 15-20 minutes. I'll start with the question that came at the beginning of this discussion. I'll forward 2 or 3 questions to the panelists. It may not be to a panelist, but the panelists are, if they're interested, they can answer. But in the first case, I will. There is a question. I think this is for Ravi, although it doesn't say it's specific for Ravi. But there is a question about, are banks willing to negotiate higher rates on FDs in comparison to market rates? And in the same context, will banks be willing to negotiate rates on long-term loans that people have taken? I mean, if you're paying 15%, are banks willing to maybe negotiate it down to 9%? Ravi, over to you.
Yeah, actually, it's a very good question. You may not have much of a leeway if you are a small guy. It is the bigger people who have this, it depends on the amount of money you have. The larger the deposit, you have some leeway to negotiate. There are other tricks of the trade where you can have a different tenor. You don't need to stick to 12 months. So there are a little bit of leeway, but what I'm suggesting is don't sleep till your fixed deposit matures. You have to be proactive. So look out, and sometimes even if you don't negotiate, you may be able to switch the bank that gives a slightly higher rate, 50 basis points or 0.5%. So that's what I'm suggesting. So when you go to take the loan, sometimes the existing institution may offer you, okay, we will match it. So there are some level of negotiation power you have to whether you are borrowing or investing. So even borrowing, you have much better negotiation because of your credit worthiness, your track record. Now, if you are SMB or for that matter, any kind of institution, if you are able to win the hearts of the bank by having a strong track record of how you have conducted your business as well as repaid your previous borrowings, you may be able to negotiate a better rate because the banks are always concerned about the risk, the credit risk. And then you may be able to show, yes, look how I have paid back. And also your standing in the industry or whatever the business you are doing, like the informal fund lenders use eyeballing. Banks also look at your way of generating cash, how you have generated cash or plan to generate cash in the future.
Thank you, Ravi. The next question is to Chanakya. What do you think about holding USD as an investment versus the Sri Lanka rupee? What is your view on that?
Yeah, so Faisal, to be honest, I'm not qualified to talk about foreign exchange markets because it is not an area I have ever covered. I mean, all I can say is that personally, I feel that any concerns about short-term rapid depreciation of the currency. I personally don't believe that there are short-term risks, because we have a extremely strict import regulation regime, and we have some amount of the trade balance already improving and things like that. The question is whether these measures can be sustained, and what is the long-term economic impact of strict import control measures. But I'm also not sure about the, I'm not an expert on the legal ways of maintaining foreign currency holdings. So I think Nirmal and Ravi would be more up to date on that. But personally, I don't feel that there is a very high risk of short-term rapid depreciation, simply because of the strong import controls we have put in place.
Would
If I may
Ravi or
come in,
Nirmal also? Yeah.
Yeah, if I may come in,
Good.
there is something called, in those days, it was called resident foreign currency accounts and non-resident foreign currency accounts. Now it's called personal finance, personal foreign currency account, PFCs. So if you are a person who have earned in dollars, like people who provide various services to institutions outside the country, and you have dollars, stick to it, because the interest rates today, strangely, are giving higher rates for dollars than even Sri Lanka rupees. Now, if you take the development bonds and if you see the auctions, you will find the US dollar of the dollar bonds where you can invest with $10,000. You can get about, if you invest in a 4-year Sri Lanka development bond, 6.87 or something like that. So it is very attractive. Of course, you have to lock up for a longer period, but even 1-year rates of Sri Lanka development bonds are pretty attractive, 5 or 6%. So it is something which today has changed, and also no taxes. So if you are in any of the dollar currency funds, there is no interest tax on those. So if you have converted previously or have earnings in dollars, do not convert to rupees at this stage.
Thank you, Ravi. The next question is to a question that has confronted many of us over the years, and that's directed to Mr. Wijewardena. The question is about why the central bank has not been able to stop these collapses, starting with Golden Key, Entrust, ETI, TFC, and so on. And in addition to that, the question is also, can't the directors be charged under criminal law and also be liable to be paid these monies back? Mr. Wijewardena.
Well, yes, Faisal, I think central bank had issued a press statement recently clarifying the objective of its financial sector regulation. They call it the macro-prudential regulation and not micro-prudential regulation. So what we mean by this macro-prudential regulation is the central bank will be concentrating on the stability of the financial system as a whole, but at the same time, it may not look at the financial viability of the individual firms that are within the financial system. All the central banks, this is not peculiar to our central bank, and all the central banks in the world, they have been charged by the community the basic responsibility of maintain the stability of the financial system as a whole. So when you have a financial system as a whole, there can be, the outliers, and those outliers can be weeded out, because that is the policy rationale and the philosophy of the central banks that are regulating the financial system of the country, because no central bank or a financial regulator could establish the viability and the solvency of an individual financial firm. So as a result, the main burden of maintaining the viability of the financial system and the assessment of the risk has been passed on to the people who have to do deals with this particular organization. So that's why Ravi said that all of us will have to be financially literate. We must look at what is happening inside these firms, and also we must, try to make out immediately if we see any kind of irregularity or malpractice that is happening inside the financial firm. So because of this reason, it is quite natural that in any economy, there are financial firms that will collapse. Now, for example, if you take USA, every year it's about 30 to 40,000 banks will collapse in the United States. But of course, the type of, the firms that you have mentioned here, the Entrust, Golden Key is not a firm that had been regulated and by the central bank, and therefore it is outside the central bank's purview. But Entrust and ETI and also CIFL, the firms, what has actually happened is that there are, you can take the directors to criminal misappropriation. Under penal code, it's not under the Banking Act or under the Montreal Act, but under the penal code, if you have defrauded to anyone, you are liable to be charged in the courts of law. So as a result, you can take them into courts. But what has happened here is that in the case of Sri Lanka, like in any other country, there had been, this politics of central banking. And I have been arguing for this, for a number of years. I am talking about Faisal, you may remember. Recently also we had a discussion on the independence of the central bank from political authorities. That is why it is very important that the central bank should be completely freed from the political authorities when it does its things. Because I know inside the central bank, there had been occasions where the technical staff of the central bank had prepared very good reports on all the firms that had collapsed and asked the monetary board to take immediate action against those firms. But somehow, when it comes to putting them into practice, I think there had been a gap, because there have been criticisms that the political authorities had not been in favor of taking action against all these firms. So that is why people of this country will have to realize, if they have an independent central bank free from the political influences, it is good for them. But if they have a central bank which is subject to political interference, interference, then of course the people will have to suffer. And the result would be the cases like the collapse of the Entrust and collapse of the other financial firms. But of course, it doesn't absolve the central bank of its liability and the responsibility. If the central bank had taken, in my view, action in time, when these matters were brought to their notice for the first time, they could have actually avoided the collapse of these firms and protected the monies belonging to the depositors. So there had been some kind of a negligence on the part of the central bank's monetary board as well.
Thank you. The next question is two questions. The first one is it safe to invest in a cooperative rural bank? That's one. And the other one is also on interest rates. Will it rise again in the next 10 years? Who can answer that? Ravi?
I can answer about these cooperative rural banks, Faisal, because remember, cooperative rural banks are not banks. They are actually the banking arm of the multi-purpose cooperative societies, which have been registered with the Registrar of Cooperative Development. They are neither being supervised by the central bank nor by any other regulatory authority in the country. They are simply the banking arm of the cooperative societies. And if anything happens to the mother cooperative society, the rural bank also will be gone. The only advantage which we had earlier, before 1990, was that these cooperative rural banks had been nurtured by the People's Bank. And as a result, if there had been any problem with any of the cooperative rural bank, the People's Bank immediately came to the rescue of the particular cooperative rural bank. But after 1990, even the People's Bank had, just shed them, and they are on their own. Now, if anyone wants to invest their money in a cooperative rural bank, he will have to take his own risk, make the risk assessment, and take the risk and do so. About the
Ravi,
interest rates, of course, Faisal, no one can say what would happen to the interest rates tomorrow, because it's a very tricky question. And even they say that the famous economist of the 20th century, John Maynard Keynes, after his death, when he wanted to go to heaven, he was confronted by St. Peter. And when he was asked, what he was when he was on the world, he said, I was an economist. Then he was given 3 questions. If he could answer these 3 questions well, of course, he can go to heaven. Otherwise, he will have to return to the earth. One question is, what will be the interest rate tomorrow? What will be the inflation rate tomorrow? And what will be the exchange rate tomorrow? The answer that he gave was all wrong. So they say he was sent back to earth, and we have all these economic problems because of that.
Ravi, any thoughts on that, on whether interest rates will rise again?
I was expecting Mr. Vijayavanathan to respond to that, but I think he's right, because it's very hard to predict, as we now know the dark side of interest rates, and the government could change the policy because it's not working. That part is very clear, and I would put it even worse, because people's income being reduced, they can't spend, so obviously they can't buy stuff. All the clothing stores I can see giving 50% discounts, hotels giving 50% or 60% discount, nobody's going. So why? Because they don't have the money. So obviously the strategy is not working. And what I believe is they may have to change after the elections. So we'll wait and see. Obviously interest rates, in my view, and my wish, because my deposits are maturing in 2021, I have to be mindful of that also. I look forward to interest rates going up.
There's a question under the central bank insurance deposit scheme. If an investment of 2 million is held by 2 persons jointly, can each joint holder claim 600,000?
Well, Faisal, in terms of the rules of the central bank's insurance scheme, deposit insurance scheme, I think Ravi made the mistake there, because it's only one deposit up to 600,000 rupees is covered. If you have deposited money in different banks, you are not covered. You are covered up to 600,000 rupees. If it is a joint one, it is still one account, and you are covered up to 600,000 rupees. And if you want to get the benefit, possibly the joint account has to be separated and invested as 2 separate accounts. Then you can go up to 1.2 billion. But in the case of the rules of the deposit insurance scheme, only one deposit or group of deposits up to a total value of 600,000 rupees in a failed financial institution will be covered by the deposit insurance scheme.
Okay. A question to Ravi on interest being more than inflation. The questioner says that the situation doesn't permit the interest to be higher than inflation rates. If you had 10 million rupees today to invest, which investment would you choose? Is it 6% FD for 1 year or 9.5% FD for 5 years? I hope you understood the question, Ravi.
Yeah, this is a question which we always grapple with as institutional investors being in the insurance company. So what we do is we have different buckets for each tenors. So even an individual could, as I think Nirmal very, very clearly explained, the importance of having this tenor management. So you don't put all in 1 year or all in 5 years. You break it up. And also, if a 10 million, you may be able to invest in different assets. So that is the principle I explained, where you take a lower risk by there is the interest rate risk, which is what we talked about this previously, where the interest rates will come down or go up. So if interest rates go up, also you benefit if you are in the short end. If it doesn't go up, you may have a certain part which is locked up at the 9.5. So that's the principle. So stick to that principle. However much you are having the total amount, you break it up and spread it in not only in terms of tenor, in terms of asset class, in terms of institutions. So that's the principle.
Uh, uh, Two questions again, I'll pose it to the panel. How safe are Sri Lanka development bonds? That's one. The second one is uh, someone was curious by the title of this discussion, the dark side of low interest rates. So what do you mean by dark side? And also, are Sri Lanka development bonds safe as an investment? Ravi, will you have to answer that?
I think Mr. Vijayawardhan is better to
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
in fact, the development bonds have a history. They actually, the Sri Lanka government started issuing them in 1998 in order to get the benefit out of the remittances that is coming to Sri Lanka from the expatriate people. And those remittances had been put in the NRFC accounts in commercial banks. And those NRFC accounts, the ones in the NRFC accounts had been lent outside Sri Lanka as well as the firms inside the Board of Investment. So government thought, okay, why not we also get the benefit out of that. Therefore, the Sri Lanka development bonds have been issued in order to get the benefit of the remittances flow into the government financial flow. So the safety of this one is that you would have noted ever since we were independent in 1948, except in 1954 and 55, we had never ever repaid any of the public debt that we had contracted. What we have done is we have recycled the public debt. Whenever a public debt matures, what we do is we issue a new public debt in order to cover the interest as well as the principal amount involved and reissue it. So it happens in the case of the foreign debt as well. So the Sri Lanka government development bonds are being used by the government of Sri Lanka. And everybody knows the government of Sri Lanka spends more than what it earns by way of tax revenue. Its tax revenue has been falling throughout the period, which was about, say, 20% in early 1980s, which has now come down to about 12%. At the same time, the Sri Lanka's export earnings, the earnings from the export of goods and services have been stagnant. And we have a massive gap in the balance of payment because we have to pay out more than what we earn in terms of foreign exchange. So we have two issues here. Issue number one is whether the government of Sri Lanka is able to repay these development bonds. To repay the development bonds, the government of Sri Lanka will have to supply rupees to central bank and buy dollars from the central bank. To supply rupees to central bank, the government of Sri Lanka doesn't have a fiscal space. It has to borrow more, specifically from the Central Bank of Sri Lanka itself. It has to borrow by issuing treasury bills and supply those rupees to central bank in order to buy dollars. For the Central Bank of Sri Lanka to sell dollars, it should have enough amount of foreign exchange in its reserves. Now, you will have noted our total foreign exchange reserves, which are held by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, is about, say, about 6 billion today, which is sufficient only for meeting about, say, 4 months of future imports. But this index is also wrong because, in my view, all we have to take into account is not only the imports, all the short-term liabilities which Sri Lanka has to meet. A good example is if we take the Sri Lanka's total foreign debt liability within the next 12-month period, that is the government's debt as well as the private debt, is about 5.5 billion. We have only reserves amounting to 6.2 billion. And at the same time, we have to meet an import program of about, say, now 18 to 19 billion. And we don't have enough foreign exchange. So this is why the Central Bank of Sri Lanka has gone to China, gone to India, gone to Federal Reserve Bank in order to get at least a short-term flow of foreign exchange. Now, India has given us a swap facility under which 400 million US dollars will be given to us, and we are giving India the equivalent amount in Sri Lanka rupees, about, say, 75 billion. So it's a swap. But when the swap is free exchange, we have to give back those dollars and India will give back the rupees to us. The same thing will happen in the case of the repo facility that we have contracted with the Federal Reserve Bank. Federal Reserve Bank has given this repo facility, which is similar to an unutilized overdraft facility in a commercial bank. The Sri Lanka government can utilize it at any time up to 1 billion. But after we have utilized it, all we have to do is we have to give back the investment that we have made in Treasury, US Treasuries, back to Federal Reserve. So we are losing. So the safety of the development bonds will depend on the safety and the stability and the strength of the economy of Sri Lanka. The stability, strength, and the safety of the economy of Sri Lanka will depend on whether we would be able to produce at a low rate, produce more, and we could maintain a high rate of economic growth continuously. And if we fail to do so, that is why we will not be able to meet our foreign exchange obligations. But there had been another question that has been raised to me, posed to me by someone. He said, this, if monetary easing is not the solution, what would you suggest to solve the problems for the common citizens? The common answer is that we have to make a sacrifice, work hard, produce more, make a strong economy, and export most of the produce that we are actually producing and earn foreign exchange and be capable of meeting our foreign exchange liabilities rather than borrowing and repaying foreign exchange liabilities. Because the latest press statement by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, you'd have noted, the central bank is trying to get about $4.5 billion US within the next, say, 3 to 4 month time period by borrowing from various sources. So this is exactly what we have been doing ever since independence. And so we are actually back to year 1948.
A few more questions before we wind up, but in the meantime, if Chanakya and Nirmal also need to intervene and have any responses to some of the questions, please intervene. Nirmal, do you have anything to say? You're on mute. You're on mute. Yes.
Yeah, no, I have nothing to add. I think Mr. Wijewardena has explained the principle with regard to default of finance companies, yes, and responsibilities of various people there. I think as Mr. Wijewardena clearly said, responsibility should start with the depositor. You can't be throwing everything back to the central bank and saying that they are responsible for everything which has gone wrong. Right? The depositors know very well the ratings of these institutions in which they are investing, whether they are even registered in the first place. And in the case of Entrust, it was not even a registered finance company, it was a primary dealer, right? So it has to start from the investor.
Yeah, thank you. There is a question.
Let me come there, Faisal.
Yes, please.
Just to add a point, I saw a question on where to find the ratings. So the simplest answer is, before you part with your money in a deposit, you need to ask the institution you are putting money whether they have a rating. They are obliged to tell if you are rated, because under the government's law, any financial institution, that means a bank or a finance company, has to have a rating. So if they are not telling you they have a rating, or they hide it, that means you better run from that place without any question. So the first answer is ask the institution. Another source is the 2 rating agencies. You can go to the Fitch Ratings website, if you have internet, and see all the rated instruments available free of charge. Same thing with ICRA. So they have published the rating, and you have to keep an eye on that rating, because if there is a downgrade, that means the risk is increasing and better start worrying about your money. So those are the things that you need to know about ratings.
There's a question, Ravi, to you about the safety of the NSB as an investment, given that NSB is supposed to be one of the most safest investments. But recently invested in the stock market, and one of the companies crashed, the TSC, for example. What are your thoughts on the NSB?
I believe NSP deposits are guaranteed by the government of Sri Lanka. I think that's the only institution where the deposits are guaranteed by the government. So whatever happens to NSP, government is obliged to pay your deposits. So that's why when I was rating, I gave a AAA to NSP. I don't know whether there is a change, but I think Fitch is no longer rating NSP. So it's ICRA rated. So NSP risk is, I would say, the minimum because it's owned by the government of Sri Lanka. Of course, there could be mismanagement or things like that that could happen in any institution with the government owned or privately owned. But still, I would strongly urge people to have confidence in NSP because that's the premier savings institution in this country.
Final question. This is a question. I think this is an issue that a lot of borrowers are facing. Banks are demanding collateral for loans, which is what happens in today's context. But in the context, what I think Mr. Wijewardena raised, where some borrowers are listed on the crib and they have that problem. And in addition to that, they might not have collateral. So how does these people who are affected by COVID-19 and implications, how are they be able to access these funds that the government is providing? Mr. Wijewardena?
Yeah, I think with regard to Faisal, the liquidity refinance fund created by the central bank, there's a credit guarantee up to 60%. So therefore, the banks have at least comfort up to 40%, and they have to be worried about only the balance 40% when they lend to a customer. This collateral-based lending and the cash flow-based lending had been a perennial issue, not only in Sri Lanka, in all the banking systems throughout the world. And with regard to this CRIB, I was the founding general manager of the CRIB in 1990. Our objective was not to use the CRIB data to eliminate a particular potential borrower. Our objective was to give sufficient more information to a banker who can analyze the credit worthiness of the customer and decide on the level of the rate of interest that he should charge given the level of credit risk that he has. So therefore, it was not supposed to serve as a prohibition. Unfortunately, today all the bankers have gone to the easy path, and instead of using their own ability to analyze the creditworthiness of customers, they just use the CRIB report and they disqualify the person from borrowing. Now, in the case of CRIB also, we have to be mindful of the fact there are 3 categories of information. One is that if you borrow money and default it to a customer, your name is recorded under direct default. Then if you have guaranteed a loan for another person and that person has defaulted, then you are also recorded as a default. The third one is in the case of these limited liability companies where the company has borrowed and defaulted, the directors' names have been recorded as defaulters. Now the last 2 categories, the guarantors and the directors, need not be taken as in the same light as the main borrowers. But the main borrowers are the ones who have been defaulting, and the people who have guaranteed the loans have no say about the money that these people have borrowed. In the case of the main borrowers also, we are now recording information starting from 25,000 rupees to any high amount. And those small borrowers, I don't think the bank should be worried about if their name is in the CRIB. So that is why I always give that the banks will have to use their good sense, or rather than they have to use the eyeball test rather than going by various type of circulars that they have been issued by the head office and also central bank. They have to use the eyeball test and measure the credit worthiness of a small borrower and lend money to those people.
Thank you, Wijewardena. Ravi, I would like to wind up. Is there anyone else who will be doing the winding up?
No, I think we have covered very well subjects. I think we answered all the questions. Just to add to Mr. Wijewardena, the collateral question is a perennial question. Being a banker, I can tell we do lend on a clean basis without collateral. So bankers do, but what that requires is track record. What that requires is your credibility, your standing. So, collateral is not the only. So if you define collateral as the assets you provide, like your buildings or land or house or whatever to borrow, that's not the collateral banks look at. Banks look at this track record, your credibility, your way of managing your money. So that is what I call collateral. It's the whole gamut of things that you build up the confidence of the banker so that he can lend. That Mr. Wijewardena's word is eyeball, because then you know exactly how that person runs his affairs. So if he is a person you can trust, you don't need collateral, but you need is that credibility. So that's why I think people are still talking about collateral without understanding what bankers mean by collateral.
Thank you, Ravi. So with that, we'll wind up this discussion. And I'd like to thank all the panelists and the presenters for their presentations, and also our participants. We tried as much as possible to answer all the questions, and I hope they are satisfied with the answers. So thank you very much. And once again, someone you'd like to say something?
Yeah, actually on behalf of OPA and CFA Society, and I want to thank all of the attendees for the very active participation, and Faisal, for you, of course, for lovely moderation, and our keynote speaker, Mr. Ravi Abbasuria, to bringing this in, and very, very useful. Everybody actually, I saw the comments, everyone is happy with this, and we have to take it forward. I think we can make the report on that. Faisal, I think I would say you can help us. And on behalf of the committee, I have to thank Dr. Wijewardena. Thank you, sir, for coming in and giving a lot of contribution, and also your insights, and also Chanakya and Neomal for your inputs. Once again, thank you, all of you, and also attendees and the members of the professional fraternity of the OPA and the CFASL. And all attendees, I have to thank on behalf of OPA for great participation and interaction. Thank you once again, all of you.
Thank you. With that, we wind up with please have a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.